Hey, Secrets Readers, this is Carlo Larosso, editor-in-chief, here with you once again. And today we are pleased to have with us Dr. Mathias Johansson from DIRAC. He is actually one of the co-founders and the chief technology officer of DIRAC. Mathias, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Carlo. It's great to be here and discuss audio with you.
That's what we're here for. All us audio nuts, up at strange hours of the morning to do intercontinental Zoom calls to further this hobby. Yes, yes, that's us. That's what us lunatics like to do, apparently.
We do.
Yes. So yeah, thank you again for joining us. And so I think our obviously with DIRAC, DIRAC has it obviously known for room correction and for home theaters and immersive listening environments. And DIRAC has recently come out with the bass control module. So I guess what I wanted to do is sort of start kind of, I guess, at the very sort of base level where most of us sort of can relate that have like general home theaters. I'll use myself for an example. When I first got my first home theater set up together, it was 5 channels, subwoofer, and that's where most of us tend to start out. A couple more channels here and there maybe, but most of us tend to start that way. And then we're told that you start with one subwoofer, and then you can add 2, or if you're slightly crazy, more, and that helps to even out the bass response in the room, especially if you have multiple seats, which is all well and good. But I kind of wanted to ask you, is it what sort of, in that sort of scenario with multiple subs, are there any sort of issues that get brought up that we don't expect or that we don't know about?
Yeah, I mean, the idea to use multiple subwoofers is great. There's no doubt about it. And why is that? Well, it's because of their room interactions. We have lots of room interactions going on with our hi-fi system. I used to say, I always stress this, like typically in most people's homes, if you have a home theater, you paid a few $1,000s for it or more, the weakest link is going to be your room. Not your speakers, not your amplifiers, but your room. So I always see the room as a component of the sound system because it has huge impact. Like, it's not unusual to have 20 dB swings in the bass response, just due to room interactions with your speaker. And this is especially in the bass region. So when we add a subwoofer, and first of all, I'd like to say, like, a subwoofer in itself, it becomes the speaker it is first in a room. The room and the speaker becomes one thing in that low frequency region because the wavelengths are so long. The wavelengths are, the same length as the room itself, or even longer.
So the room has the most effect in those bass regions, and that can dictate dictate the results the most in those bass in those bass frequencies, basically.
Exactly. And when the room interacts, you get standing waves building up. We talk about room nodes. So you have like a wave pattern in your room, depending on where your subwoofer is located in relation to the ceiling, the walls, etc. You get different patterns in the room, and at some point you get complete suck out because you might have the sound first comes from the subwoofer towards you, and then from the other side, from the back wall behind you, comes at like opposite time and just cancels out. Like, waves in the ocean can cancel out.
It creates like a null somewhere at a given frequency where you're sitting, for example.
And that depends exactly where you're seated. Right? So it's going to vary across the room. And at other points, you have instead a peak with too much bass. And this lingers in time. So you get like a resonance, and then you get this boomy response, which makes it hard to distinguish different instruments in the bass. It's a little bit muddy. So then, so that's the problem we have. It's the reality simply of, you're playing bass sound through a speaker in a room. That's reality. You're going to have varying response, and it's not going to be ideal. So the idea by adding another subwoofer is that, well, then you can time it slightly differently and even out the response, because, it's not that likely that these both are, because they're positioned in different locations, that they will have the exact same interference pattern with the room.
They're not exciting the room at the same way, basically.
Exactly. So you have variations from one to the other, and then this means that they, average out a little bit, these nulls and peaks, to get a more even response. You actually typically get the more even. You can get the more even response just in your main listening area, or listening position, I should say. But also the big thing why you're adding more subwoofers is to even out the response between different feeds.
Right.
To get more even sound.
So each person in the theater has a more consistent experience, basically.
Exactly. So that's like the thought behind it. And it's all nice and it's correct. Reality is difficult, though. It's hard to predict where do I position the speakers to get this even response. How do I get the most out of these two or more subwoofers, so that I can really get that even response, both in the sort of the sweet spot, but also across the different listening positions.
Right.
And that's one of the real problems. And you might say, well, I run room correction. I might use DIRAC Live, regular room correction, or some other room correction. But room correction typically works speaker by speaker. And even though each speaker becomes better tuned to your room, if you just look at one speaker at a time in the different listening positions, they can still combine in unpredictable ways.
And still create those unexpected interactions.
Yeah, you get these unexpected interactions. You have slight phase differences from one speaker to the other. And all of a sudden, you still have these problems with uneven bass, even though you actually optimize one speaker at a time. So by having more than one subwoofer, you have a much higher potential for good sound and for even sound. So it's not just for one person, but a consistent sound experience. But it's also tricky to actually get it right. And just very recently, to give you an example, here, not in this listening room where I'm at now, but in another lab that we have here at DIRAC, I was running a 3 subwoofer setup, optimizing first each speaker individually, also, time and gain, aligning them to my sweet spot where I was seated. And then I look at the sum response of these 3 subwoofers, and it looks like a mess, honestly speaking, because of these phase interactions with the room.
I'm glad you have those problems being an expert. It's not just us. So, it's nice. It's nice to hear that you guys have issues.
Yeah, we don't get it right from start, right? We have to work to get it right. But that illustrates the point, because it wasn't like we had set them up to, sit at very strange positions. They were in reasonable positions around the room. So you'd think you'd get a more even response. And it was really kind of ironic, because the end result with 3 subwoofer was also actually in combination. It was less bass than when I had optimized 1 subwoofer.
Interesting.
So that might, if you're listening to this now, you might say, oh, why should I even bother buying more subwoofers?
Throw the 4th one in there. Throw the 5th one in there.
But I mean, the point is there that it's possible to get it right. It's just that it's not just to position the subwoofers, because I think many of us can be in that situation. You buy an extra subwoofer, you expect to get a little bit more bass, a little bit more punch, a little more extension, and more even response. And you sit there and listen, and it's like, no, I don't really hear that. I'm a bit disappointed. And that's where something like this bass control algorithm comes in. The idea is there that, what you could do, if you don't use the algorithm, what you can do then, if you see or hear that, I still have some nulls here, well, then you need to move around the subwoofers, and you will be able to find some location where it starts to play back coherently so that the sound gets really nice again. But how do you do it? It's really difficult to do it manually. So that's why we devised actually this bass control algorithm in the first place. It was to help set multi-subwoofer systems up with traditional bass management. In general, I'd say a lot of people actually, I think that's one of the trickiest parts of setting up a home theater system. It's like, how do I integrate the subwoofer with the main speaker?
So that way stuff sounds cohesive and you don't really get any holes anywhere in the response. Yeah.
And so that's why we started looking into this problem. And, we said, like, well, first of all, the whole thing, if we're going to set this up in regular receivers, well, we have the crossovers, but we so we can optimize the crossovers first of all, and make sure that between the main speakers and the subwoofers we get the best possible result. It's just like for example, deciding which crossover frequency should you use. You can use the measurements that you anyway do with DIRAC Live to get an idea of the roll-off of the different speakers and where it would make most sense to position the crossover so that you get, again, no nulls, no suck-outs in that crossover region.
Right.
And that's not the only thing. So that's the first thing we do, right, based on the measurements. But then you can also optimize the phase at that crossover. So we actually adjust all pass filters to make sure that the main speakers and the bass channel combines as well as possible.
It's getting that phase aspect and then matching correctly between the subs and the various channels, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Because, depending on where, again, like the distance from your subwoofer to the listening position relative to the different speakers, you can have various phase differences, right? There, you can tweak that a little bit and make sure that it sums up as best as possible.
Right.
But that's just sort of the single subwoofer problem. But then we've had the multiple subwoofer. That's where it really shines, because this is so tricky to get right otherwise. So what are we doing there? Well, we are combining the different bass speakers that you have, the different subwoofers. First do the regular speaker correction one by one.
Right.
We also, because we have these measurements, we see the sum response at all of the measurement positions. So we see all these peaks and valleys and how it differs from one seat to the other. Based on that, what we can do is, again, adjust different filters. What we're doing is we're adjusting all pass filters. All pass filters is only adjusting the phase at various frequencies of the subwoofer, not actually the magnitude response.
Okay, so just basically the phase then.
Yes, we do also adjust the delay and the gain subwoofer.
Okay.
So this is like, we're not changing, the output power in any way, actually.
Okay.
So we're just aligning them better in time.
So it's not like using, you forgive me sort of in my ignorance, but like say a series of parametric filters and like adding like ungodly amounts of gain to like fill in a null or something like that. This is something completely different than that.
And that's a very good remark, because if we would try to just fill in the null, that's typically not a good idea, because then we're forgetting about the real issue is not that, there's no gain from the subwoofer. It is the interaction with the room. It's a timing problem, actually. I get a reflection from one side and interferes with a direct wave, and I get something that is a cancellation. You can't fix that. You're not fixing that problem if you're just trying to inject energy at that frequency. Right. So instead, you should change. If we think about, like, we have a wave at 80 hertz going out from the subwoofer, and let's say we have two subwoofers. So it comes from one subwoofer there to my point here, and it is like, at the highest part of the cycle. Whereas from the other subwoofer, it's timed slightly differently. That's the phase difference we're talking about.
Okay.
Due to the room interaction, it might be a little bit delayed, might be a valley, and then they sum up together, in some way, and all of a sudden I don't have that nice flat response. That will vary from one frequency to the other. Right. That's why you get this, wavy,
just uneven sort of response, basically, right?
And there's so we talk about both the uneven response in your sweet spot, but also the seat to seat variation. So it will look different, also, this interference pattern.
Okay.
But then by changing the phase of that 80 hertz a little bit, then I can make sure it sums up nicely in the sweet spot. And I can also adjust it so that it evens out in the whole region, not just in one position. And that's what we're doing with bass controls. We're just changing the timing and also the gain a little bit, not by a lot, actually. Because if you bought subwoofers, you want to use them. We don't want to crank them up or down too much.
Right,
just a little bit. And same with the time delay, just to make sure that they sum up as much in phase as possible, so to speak. So the end result is that you're getting this even response in the sweet spot and the same one in the other seats, just by phase manipulations.
So So just staying on that subject, the phase manipulation for a second. Now you use the 80 hertz example, but it's not just changing the phase at that one point. I mean, how many points is it? Is it for each frequency? I mean, how many points?
We have a number of all-pass filters in the system. Not that many, actually, because we don't want to change too much. Normally, you don't need to change too much.
Okay.
I think it's in general, like, it's a principle that we have. Like, we don't want to do, a lot of manipulation. We want to get it right. We don't want to overdo stuff.
Right.
And so we just have a few all-pass filters, and they operate, over frequency range a little bit, and they can be adjusted so that they
Gotcha.
get the right level, so to speak.
Okay.
And we've found that makes it possible to get this even bass throughout a listening region, throughout the room, so to speak.
Understood. Okay. Interesting. So once that's all said and done and the calculations are done and the computer is done, or your tablet or whatever is done, it's a little crunching and everything, it should all give you a really nice, even bass response. And
yeah. I mean, the end result, if we go back to this example I mentioned, the other room that we have here, that was
the 3 subs,
all that I did. Like, all of a sudden you have an even bass response, as even as you can. Of course, there's still going to be some amount of variation depending on how many subwoofers you have and the room interactions.
Uh-huh.
But the whole point is that you get a very even bass response, as good as you possibly can with the given setup that you have.
Uh-huh.
So that's sort of the idea, is like, we have a given setup. Now we want to make that sound as good as possible. So you reduce the seat-to-seat variations, and you improve the main response so that you have an even full-bodied bass, so to speak. That's the end result.
Interesting. Well, very cool. Very cool. That's exactly what you want, basically. So excellent. Well, so beyond DIRAC bass control, I mean, there's other solutions out there. I mean, I know Odyssey has its own thing that it's doing, and what was it? Trinoff has got their, what do they call it, waveforming or whatever heck it is. But these are all they're all 3 sort of different techniques, basically, as far as we know. They're not all sort of the same thing. There's like three different sort of solutions or techniques to solve a given problem, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I think, there are different approaches you can take and different, again, I would also, with bass control, we really said also this should work within sort of standard bass management idea, having a crossover. Mm-hmm. As you maybe know, also, we have this technique that we call active room treatment that's come from ago.
Yeah.
And that has another goal as well. There we're saying, like, well, if we have bass management and we're crossing over, we're in a way limiting the system. If we have full ranges together with subwoofers, we could use the overlapping frequency region as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you get even more possibilities to output sound and combat the bad room acoustics at those overlapping frequencies. So there are different techniques. And with ART, or active room treatment, we're also looking at the wave propagation. With bass control, we're really looking at the evenness from one seat to the other and in the sweet spot of the frequency response.
Mm-hmm.
But with ART, we're also saying we use all these bass-capable speakers together in the bass region to combine perfectly with each of the main speakers and create a coherent sound wave, like an ideal wave propagation. So this is looking both at the spatial domain, as we call it, and time domain, in addition to just the frequency response. And what you're getting there is one additional benefit, and that's that the decay time of the bass is reduced. Because with bass control, we're not really reducing the decay time in the room. We're just evening out the frequency response. And in the first step, in room correction, you're still making the speaker sound better in the time domain as well. But with bass control, we're then taking that result and evening out the response. With ART, what happens there is that we're able also to control the time domain aspects, reduce the decay time of the room, and it essentially ensure that you get more of a perfect wavefront from each of the speakers. So there are slightly different techniques, and you have the ones you mentioned as well, that have their small differences and so on. And the way we have progressed is like from, why did we devise these different technologies? You might say that if there's one that is the best, why don't we always use that? Well, it's also about having the bass control.
Basically.
Bass control is really aimed at regular systems working within sort of the regular structure that we have in an AVR with bass management, optimizing this as good as possible. In art, we said, well, let's forget about that for a minute. Let's think, what could we theoretically do? And really push something completely new and different out to the market, which opens up for creating very different kinds of sound systems, actually, with more, speakers that play together in the bass region, not just having separate cross or separate.
And art sounds like it lends itself to the idea of like sort of the more speakers you have, the more because you're if I understand right, you're essentially using the capabilities of like one channel to assist with the deficiency of another, basically, and help compensate for that. So if I'm understanding this right, my little brain is understanding this right. If the more speakers you have in a setup, the more possibilities you have to, the more resources you have to get that right and to take care of those deficiencies that you may have from other speakers, if I'm getting that right.
That's exactly right. So it's a way to really actively treat the room. And so, like you say, like we're overcoming the weakest links, that the system starts cooperating. And that's a very new paradigm, you could say. We've used it in cars, mind you, in a couple of years. Started out in, I guess, 2015 with the Bowers and Wilkins sound system.
Right.
There are many other cars today, and that's where we kind of perfected this technology.
Well, that's a good test bed, because you have basically, from model to model, you have a set of parameters in terms of space, and you have some option differences and stuff, and some materials differences, but you kind of know what you're dealing with. So
exactly.
Interesting.
And the problem is really very big in cars, as everybody's aware of it. Listen to car sound systems; it's very boomy, basically.
Oh, yeah.
But on the other hand, in the high-end systems, you have like 20, 30 channels these days. So there's a lot of room to actually do the stuff we do to optimize it. You have several woofers, subwoofers playing together and truly optimize that system, get a very, very, very nice experience these days. So that's where we perfected it, and now it's coming out. And of course, step by step, going into more accessible systems. But we're starting out together with Storm at the very sort of high end.
That's right. So Storm still has the exclusive until. So
there will be others coming out with it, but of course we're taking it step by step, ensuring that it's like it's a very advanced technology. We just want to make sure it works and is easy enough to set up for everyone and so on. But it's looking good. We're getting very, very good feedback on the results, and so we're looking forward to seeing more systems out there with it. But meanwhile, also bass control is I think really, really useful, because it is also less computationally demanding. So it's something that, and it worked with crossovers and stuff that people are familiar with. So it's in that way, I think, very accessible, and it really goes to the heart of this really, the fundamental problem in room acoustics, which is just getting the bass response even, both in the listening sweet spot and the seat to seat.
And it addresses basically the biggest sort of issues that most people have in a traditional home theater setup, basically. So, yeah. So, let me ask you this. Touch on this. I mean, there's this whole. I get lately when I was at CEDIA last year, the whole buzz was this concept of directional bass, basically. Different systems and stuff we're talking about. You have choices where you could set the bass to, be directional, where, you could actually hear it move from one end of the theater to the other, depending on what's going on the screen. I've had sort of limited experience with it in terms of hearing it executed well. I personally, I find it works better in a larger theater than something smaller. But that's just, my anecdotal experience. What do you think of this whole idea of directional bass? Does it make sense? Or is it like some sort of, buzz thing at the moment, or?
That's a good question. I mean, I personally think there's maybe, if you look at what the research is telling us, we normally say that in the bass region, we don't hear direction. And we actually pick up. But there's some limit to that, of course, where we actually start picking up direction. And I think I feel a little bit like you said, it probably works reasonably well in larger spaces. I also have not really, myself at least, experienced it really well executed in more reasonable home setups and so on. So I'm maybe not like feeling like this is a huge thing for me, at least, my personal taste. And I think what's important is always the integration, though, of the main speaker with the bass, because that's really, as long as you make sure that the main speaker is well integrated with the bass, and then you can have a mono bass, then I'd say you will perceive direction coming all the way down to the bass, because it's how your ears typically trigger at higher frequencies to pick up the direction. So I would say, as long as you actually have integrated them well, that is that they're, the sum response is even, and they're timed the right way, even though you actually have mono bass, so not directional bass, you will perceive directional bass to trigger at the higher frequencies.
Right. Where it actually matters. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that's, I think, my main take on this. That I think that's more important than having a bass directional system. But I'm not like, I'm not having a very strong opinion to one or the other direction there in terms of directional bass, because I have limited exposure with the concept myself. But I'm, I have this classic background where, like, the lowest frequency you don't really pick up. My experience is that very few instruments, for example, that you listen to, or sound that you listen to, natural sound, are confined only to the bass. And that means that we can perceive direction even though the lowest end isn't really directional.
Right.
So that's the where I
when it gets beyond that frequency where you can localize it, that's basically where
that's where we trigger on. And then we say, the bass must come from there. Whereas in fact, you might not, if you would low pass filter, maybe you don't hear that so clearly, right?
Okay, it's interesting.
I wouldn't say, I'm not the expert on this. I haven't experimented a lot with the directional bass, but that's where I come from, at least. That's my tentative.
No, that makes sense, because I mean, I certainly am no expert on it either. And when I go to one of these trade shows, and we sort of report on the latest and greatest and what's going on, and this is one of the things that's, some people are talking about is, you can have directional bass. And it's like, okay, well, sounds interesting, but, what does that mean? And how does that work? And is it really, is it all it's cracked up to be, or is it, something you don't need to worry about? So it's just, it's more a curiosity thing for me than anything else. But I appreciate your take on it. It's kind of sort of mirrors sort of what I've kind of experienced so far. So no, very cool. So I guess now maybe sort of veering a little bit into the idea of like the whole idea of immersive sound in theaters and stuff, and the new standards, the new RP22 immersive sound standards that have come out. Did you have any participation in helping set those standards up, or did you have any direct involvement with that, or
we had limited involvement? We were not part of the group writing it. We were part of reviewing a bit in the later parts. So I'm personally more of a an audience to it and a reader of this, the recommended practices, which I think are very good, actually.
That's what I was going to say. Ask next. What's your take on it? Is I've spoken to some of them, and when they set it up and sort of drop, and it sounds interesting from my end, but I'm curious to get your take on it.
I mean, setting up an immersive system or home theater system, whatever we like to call it, as you well know, it's a very difficult task. It's so multidimensional, so many aspects to saying that this is good. It's not one-dimensional at all. I just look at it. We have both audio and video, and we have all the aesthetics around it and so on. So I think it's very helpful to have some kind of guidance in that. Like, I think it's good that they're pointing out also the compromises that you're inevitably having to do on a limited budget. You can't get everything right. I think they make a good job of also describing, for example, sound quality categories. They split it up into 3 main categories: the spatial resolution, timbre, dynamic, and they go down and so on. It's just pretty good to reflect on that when you build your system and see what's important for me and so on, and see where can I invest to make it better. I think it's well written. It provides sort of a good snapshot of what is, the kind of, what should we call it, the consensus in industry and academia about what good sound and good immersive sound constitutes. So it gives you a lot of good ideas. Then on the other hand, it doesn't provide you with like the cookbook answer. This is how you build it. But that's reality. It's not that easy. There's not one. That's why we're sitting here, right? And why this hobby is so fun, because you can always find ways of improving. It's not like there's one given solution and we're done. There's so much more to do all the time. But I think it's really helpful. I like the fact actually that they also defined the 4 different performance levels and not just.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting how they did that, and it was unique, and what it takes to get each one of those, to levels and stuff. I thought that was a good feature.
But I mean, it becomes like something to aim for as well when you build your own system. Yeah, that they actually managed to get to some relatively well-defined objective metrics. Great, and I think all of them make sense. The only thing that I'm missing, perhaps, there's maybe 2 things in like future revisions that we will see. Who knows? One is the time domain aspects of bass tightness is not really mentioned here. How do we measure that? But that's not strange, because there is no universal consensus on that today. And there's not been that much technology around to really improve that as well. It's more like you get what you get. Exactly. This is changing, and so it'll be interesting to see how also the whole audio community finds new measures and finds measures that we can agree on, correlate with good, sound. And the other thing is maybe the in-room response over the full bandwidth, because that's not really defined, which I also understand, because it's not that easy to say, which is good. I think it makes a good job of describing the complexities also, because when we look at, we talk about frequency response, we talk about timbre and so on, but when you measure a frequency response with a microphone, if you just measure it with some standard analyzer, the thing you're seeing there on that plot is not the same thing that you're experiencing. What we're after is the experience and not the measurement. The measurement should correlate with our experience, obviously. And that's also actually sort of a little bit of a blind spot, I would say.
Because that is not always the case. Sometimes the measurement doesn't always corroborate with the experience that you get.
Absolutely.
And it's finding that area where it does.
Exactly. So that's something that is still, there's still research to be done and to be published on what constitutes good sound in rooms, but and there are things that are sort of white spots on the map, and there's a lot of research that can still be done. But nevertheless, it's the RP22. If you follow these guidelines, you're going to get good results. You get to reflect on what you want to prioritize in your system as well, which I think is just good. I think it's a great document just to learn more if you're interested in audio, because there is so much to learn in this field, and I think this is actually quite well written and to the point, and it's sort of, not pressing anybody's agenda. It's more neutral, based on like what we actually know. Is it where there's consensus, and where there's not consensus, that's left for the time being, and that's fine. That's how it should be. It needs to evolve as well.
It's a big document, and they covered a lot of ground for something. So I think the biggest thing that I got out of it, reading through it, and then talking with some of the writers and stuff, was that, I mean, the room is the biggest thing, and it seems to make that pretty clear. A lot of us in this hobby are hung up on the equipment end of things.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, more channels, oh, more subs, oh. The latest AVR, the latest preamp, or this or that, and it's like, that's great, but I mean, no manner of gear or speakers or whatever is going to be able to make up for a crummy sounding rig.
Exactly.
And that's the biggest thing. So
I fully agree. I think that was it was really good to really point that out so much. That's like we talked about earlier. That's how we started this conversation. It's a little bit like, the room is the weakest link typically, and it's like the determining link. So many times you're better off investing more in getting that. Well, even if you can't change stuff physically, you can do room correction of various kinds. That's one option. So don't just think about the equipment, or at least think about your room as part of the equipment then, so that you spend equally much time on that. Of course, not just as fun to go to as going to the hi-fi shop and looking for new gear.
It's like, we're just human. A lot of us aren't interior decorators or anything, or or like some of us don't even really care what a room looks like as long as it's got four walls, and it doesn't matter. But it's an important thing, and I mean, I've been asked a bunch of times from just friends of mine, and it's like, if I'm gonna spend this, I'm gonna have this budget, I'm gonna spend this kind of money, what's the most important thing I need to spend my money on? And it's like, if I'm gonna be honest with you, it's like, the room, the speakers, then everything else. That's, I mean, from my perspective, that's what it is. So
I agree. And with these new technologies such as hardware-based control, it also means that you can spend your money a little bit more cleverly in a way, right? Because you don't need necessarily to have big full range speakers. Especially in hi-fi, in stereo hi-fi, I would say it's still that notion around that you need two really big speakers, and subwoofers aren't really hi-fi. I'd say, I'd challenge that notion, because I think today you can build, if you look at price performance, which to me is always the big thing, to create something really good from a limited budget. That's much more interesting than these unlimited budget. Right? And then it's like, then subwoofers have a really good role to play here. And also from aesthetic reasons, if you, the big towers, they take up a lot of space. You can actually get very far with reasonably sized speakers and subwoofers. There's a huge
very much so.
Spread out in your room, and smaller, let's put it that way, speakers make for a very cost-effective solution when you combine it with room correction and stuff like bass control or art. That's exciting for me. I think that this is a way to get around these room problems, because you might say you want to spend a lot of money on your room to get it better, but it's also having an impact. It takes up space typically. It changes the looks of your room, and you might not be allowed to do that if you're living in a
depending on your domestic situation. The boss may say, no, you can't do that. No, very true, very, very true. That's actually very interesting you mentioned that, because I remember the first time I had heard, this had to be at CES years ago. I think the first time I had heard a demonstration of like an early version of art. I think at that time it was called, if I remember correctly, it was called was it Unison or something like that?
Correct. Oh yes.
Yeah. And I heard this demonstration of it, and it was like with these little
Yes,
mini
that's right.
speakers.
And really small speakers. Though.
Yeah, really small speakers. And it was like in a room, and it was like a jury rigged with all this stuff. And you walked in there, and you're like, whoa, like what the heck is this? And what am I going to hear? And it's like the demo. And I remember the demo from just they're played back for people. Played it first, and with just the speakers alone, and it was like, yeah, okay, little speakers or whatever, blah blah blah. Flipped the switch. It essentially was flipping the switch, and the unison came up, and it was like, whoa, what just happened here? This was like, I mean, it was that. I remember. I mean, it was that drastic a difference even back then, and it was like, what on earth is going on here? And I remember having just the basics of the theory explained to me, and I was like, this is like, if they can pull this off and make it, and it does like this, but in a home theater setting, this could be just crazy good. And but even back then, it was a heck of a demonstration, and yeah, you're right. It shows what's possible with like just if you have the right setup, you don't need like ginormous, super expensive things like speakers and stuff around your room. I mean, it's more of it's being more intelligent about having a more intelligent and sort of targeted kind of setup, basically, to deliver the experience.
Yeah, I mean, today, and that was one of the reasons why we threw that demo out there. It was to kind of challenge the notion of how a high-end system should be built. But it's like, even today, most of us will still just, buy the speakers and so on, and then add room correction or speaker correction on top of it, and you will get the great results from that. But I think the interesting thing that we're going to see if we look like 5 or 10 years ahead, I'm sure we're going to use this technology to create new and more cost-effective system designs where you can really create these big experience, really rich experience that you would imagine you'd have to have, huge towers all around you, but you actually manage to do it with small speakers and then cleverly, hidden away some subwoofers here and there, and not just even subwoofers, but more like woofers, bass speakers that go up higher in frequency to help the other speakers again to overcome their limitations. And I think that's when I look at the future of audio, I think something like that is around the corner, and I think it's very, very exciting because it will eventually mean more people can have access to great sound regardless of budget.
So you're basically talking about I don't want to use the term lifestyle system, but we know what that is. But basically, sort of almost like a closed kind of system where it's like you have a very kind of we'll say spouse friendly kind of main unit or chassis or whatever, and matching small kind of speakers and maybe some bass things that maybe even with the wireless standards out, the speakers are wireless, so they don't need wires running around all over the place. And it's basically like a turnkey system that has, for example, art integrated into it. You just basically set it up, and it looks nice. It's not as super intrusive, and turn it on, and boom, it does its measurements, and you're ready to go. That's kind of basically what it sounds like you're getting at.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely think there's a place for that, and it would create, really exceptional experiences for a very limited budget, and also with limited sort of, impact on how the looks of your room.
Right.
Right. So that excites me, I think, because that would make it much more accessible to get really high-end experiences to more people, which is in the end, I think, really, really
easier to sell to your spouse. There's always that. There's always that. Whatever, right? But yeah, no, that would be. Have the folks at Bang & Olufsen been calling you lately? I can imagine.
Yeah, it sounds like something for them. Yeah.
They're like going, hey, wait a minute. But yeah, that. Oh, yeah, I'm sure. But yeah, I could definitely see that as being like a solution for and a desirable solution for a lot of people, and especially even also in smaller spaces too. I mean, something your apartment space or condo or small home or whatever. That would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Mathias, I think that kind of that kind of more or less sort of covers what I wanted to talk about. It's this is really, I mean, this is really exciting in the sense that, you kind of talked about sort of what's possible currently, and then what we also kind of touched on what may be coming down the road as well, which is also interesting, and it kind of gets me a little excited too, which is why we do this. We
It's always fun.
yeah, no, we look for the fun in this and the things that get us really jazzed about stuff. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, especially you being like across the ocean somewhere in the hinterlands. So no, I really appreciate
My pleasure.
Really
Thanks,
appreciate the time. Yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all. Yeah, that's all I got.
Well, then I'd have to say congratulations on your 30th birthday as well, then.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. We are 30 years old. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's not bad.
Yeah, it's not actually. They okay. If I'm going to toot our own horn a little bit, they say we are the oldest online audio video website on the internet. So 1994.
That's amazing.
Yeah, back in the days of dial-up modems and Netscape Navigator. Yeah.
Good stuff.
It is. We're still hanging in there.
Congratulations. Yeah, you're doing it really well.
Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it.